Have you ever stopped to think about how much of who we are, who we actually become, isn't shaped by what's said out loud, but maybe more by what's left unsaid? You know, those quiet traumas, the family secrets just sort of hanging in the air, especially between parents and kids. Today, we're really diving deep into that exact territory. We're looking at Adam Haslett's novel, Mothers and Sons, and we've pulled together insights from some great sources, The Guardian, Chicago Review of Books, Financial Times, bookbrowse.com, to really try and unpack this complex story about emotional distance. So our mission for you today is to pull out the key insights, the important stuff from all this material. We'll explore how these hidden traumas can, echo through people's lives, how sometimes helping others, that drive for service, can actually be a way of avoiding your own stuff, and also the path to reconciliation, how it's often much more subtle, more understated than we might think. It's a really powerful look at family and the psyche.
Yeah, and what's really striking right from the beginning is how Haslett uses the novel's structure to show that complexity. It flips between Peter's view first person and Anne's third person. And slowly, you start to see just how deep the emotional gap is between them. It's almost like two separate investigations into the same past, giving us both sides, but no single easy answer. The form itself kind of mirrors how slippery truth can be in families.
That's a great point about the structure, and their physical distance really hammers that home, doesn't it? It mirrors the emotional chasm perfectly. You've got Peter in New York City, completely drained, isolated, just pouring everything into being an asylum lawyer. And then his mother, Anne, she's taken this totally different route. She's way out in rural Vermont leading meditation, spiritual support, a women's retreat with her partner, Claire. So how did these really different settings kind of deepen that divide, set the stage for what we're about to get into?
Well, the contrast is just huge, isn't it? Peter's life in New York, it's frantic, demanding. He's right in the thick of it with asylum law. It immediately suggests, his external world is just as overwhelming as whatever he's keeping locked up inside. He deals with intense human suffering daily, but it's always other people's suffering. And though she's in this quiet, almost peaceful Vermont setting, she's also focused on healing, but it's spiritual healing. Very different vibe. So both are deeply invested in empathy, in helping, but they're physically and symbolically just worlds apart. Each has built a life that's demanding, yes, but also weirdly isolating in its own way.
Absolutely. Okay, let's dive deeper into Peter Fisher then. He's 40, gay, an asylum lawyer. Sources say he's incredibly dedicated, maybe too dedicated. He keeps people at arm's length personally, right? Casual intimacy, okay, but deeper connections, nope. Mistrusts them. And what really jumps out is how the sources mention he just fills his life with these caseloads. What's going on there beyond just wanting to help people? Is the book suggesting this dedication is like a shield, a way to avoid his own past?
Well, thoroughly so. And it makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we see this, maybe even in ourselves or people we know, where you pour energy into service, not just because it's good, but because it's protective. For Peter, his work is like a fortress. He engages with people at their absolute most vulnerable, yet he keeps that professional distance. And that perfectly mirrors how he is in his personal life, emotionally detached. The novel shows really carefully how he's haunted by this suppressed trauma from when he was a teenager, involving his first love, Jared. It's not just a plot point, it's a deep psychological insight, how unresolved pain shapes your whole approach to connection. His law work, noble as it is, lets him have this kind of intimacy without intimacy. Always on the edge, never truly engaged emotionally.
Wow, intimacy without intimacy. That's powerful. Service as avoidance. And it makes you think about the effects of that. But Peter's not alone in this pattern, is he? His mother, Anne, she's a parallel case. She used to be a priest, Episcopal, or maybe Protestant. The sources vary slightly. But she left her husband for Claire, co-founded this feminist spiritual community in Vermont. And she genuinely cares about supporting these broken and battered women. Her work is important. But given what we just said about Peter, how does Anne's journey, her own form of service, kind of echo her son's way of dealing with the past, or maybe differ slightly? Anne's story really hits that same note, maybe even more powerfully, because it's wrapped up in spirituality and healing. She's building this community, creating a safe space, but the sources make it clear she's carrying this huge weight of guilt. And detachment from Peter specifically, for years. It's a different flavor of the same thing, isn't it? Pouring yourself into helping others to manage your own internal pain, your own unresolved issues, especially her role, whatever it was, in Peter's teenage trauma. Her service gives her purpose, external validation, which, let's face it, can feel really good, but it doesn't actually fix the emotional debt she carries regarding her son. So Peter uses the rigid structure of law and uses the more fluid space of spiritual guidance. Both are doing intense emotional labor for others, but the really deep work within their own family bond. Still undone.
Okay, so you've got both mother and son using service to avoid dealing with things. How does that actually play out in their relationship? It feels like that secret trauma from Peter's teens is the massive elephant in the room, keeping them apart for decades.
It absolutely is. It's the silent epicenter of their whole estrangement. The novel does this brilliantly. It's this shared memory, something only Anne really shares with Peter, but it's just been buried under silence, unspoken grief. And that silence itself almost becomes a character, shaping how they interact, how they think. Their demanding jobs become these like psychological walls. They live these outwardly meaningful lives, but insulate them from the really hard work of healing their own histories, their losses. It's like they're both waiting for the other one to break the silence, but neither can quite do it. So the painful distance just continues. The insight for us maybe is how deep bonds can break, not from big fights, but from that quiet, steady erosion of unspoken truth.
Right. Okay, so then we get to a turning point for Peter. He takes on the case of Vasil, a young gay asylum seeker from Albania. And Vasil's story is just devastating. He was almost killed by his own family just for being seen with another boy. These details, they really shake Peter up, break through his usual composure. So how does this case, which is about helping someone else, end up forcing Peter to confront his own buried memories about Jared, about his own guilt?
Vasil's case basically acts like an emotional mirror for Peter. It just shatters those defenses he's built up so carefully, and it really highlights that intimacy without intimacy thing, but in a way that becomes unbearable for him. He's hearing Vasil's incredibly raw, painful story, absorbing all these vulnerable details, but the sheer visceral nature of it, especially how it connects to being queer, to family rejection. Peter just can't keep his distance anymore. It's too close to his own hidden pain, too resonant with the secret he's carrying. The sources suggest he's not just hearing a client, he's almost reliving his own stuff. It's a really stark example of how true empathy can sometimes bypass all our careful walls and force us to face our own unresolved issues, whether we're ready or not. It stops being just about helping and becomes this unexpected, involuntary self-reckoning.
That leads us into some really deep themes running through the whole novel, themes that affect the characters and probably resonate with us as readers too. Let's start with secrets and silence. How does Haslett really show us the impact? How hidden trauma shapes lives, relationships, identities over decades, often without a word spoken?
He does it with incredible subtlety. The lack of communication about the trauma becomes this tangible thing in the book. It doesn't just create distance, it actually warps how they see things. Peter, for example, has built his whole adult identity around being competent, emotionally guarded, all rooted in that incident he hasn't dealt with. Anne carries her guilt like a shield of detachment. She can't truly connect because of what she knows or thinks she knows and hasn't said. The silence doesn't make the past go away. It just pushes it underground where it keeps pulling the strings. That's the key takeaway for us, isn't it? How not speaking can be just as formative, maybe even more so, than words in shaping who we are in our relationships.
And then there's the whole mother-son dynamic itself. The sources mention this complex intimacy they have, but also how distance can lead to idealizing someone, while being close just breeds misunderstanding because the real issues aren't on the table. What does that say about how we tend to fill in the blanks with our own stories?
It says a lot, I think. When there's no real communication, both Peter and Anne create versions of each other. These versions are less about the actual person and more about their own needs, their own fears. For Peter, maybe Anne, being distant, becomes this idealized figure of guilt, or maybe just unresolved longing. For Anne, Peter's distance might confirm her own sense of failure as a mother. Then, when they're physically together, these internal versions clash with the reality in front of them. That causes misunderstanding because their internal scripts just don't match the unaddressed truth between them. It really highlights how much relationship pain often comes not from bad intentions, but from these silent narratives we build up, which just get harder and harder to break down over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And tied into all this are themes of identity and empathy. You've got Peter's queer identity, Anne's unconventional choices, Vasil's asylum story. They all touch on these broader questions about belonging, acceptance. And that parallel vocation theme we talked about is key here too. Both Peter and Anne deepen these service professions law, spiritual guidance framed almost as atonement. What's the novel really getting at about the link between healing ourselves and helping others?
It's pointing to something complex and maybe a bit uncomfortable, which is, while helping others is valuable, deeply fulfilling even, it can also be a really sophisticated way to avoid your own inner work if that remains undone.
The sources paint Peter and Anne as incredibly capable of giving empathy and support outwardly, but sort of locked when it comes to receiving or processing it for themselves. Their jobs become ways to manage guilt, maybe assert control, find the meaning that kind of papers over their personal pain. It's like they're trying to heal the world, or a piece of it, to avoid the scary, necessary work of healing themselves and their core relationship. It raises a really interesting question for all of us, doesn't it? Is our drive to help sometimes rooted in a deeper, maybe unacknowledged need to fix something inside ourselves?
Right. So eventually, after Basil's case kind of cracks him open, Peter's defenses start to crumble. And this leads to a confrontation with Anne, finally, about that shared secret. But the resolution isn't like a big Hollywood moment. Critics call it quietly powerful, subtle, moving, but not necessarily this huge cathartic release. How does that quietness speak volumes? What does it suggest about what reconciliation actually looks like?
Yeah, that resolution really pushes back against our usual expectations of catharsis. No big explosion, no instant healing where everything's suddenly perfect. Instead, it's about emotional precision, as the Chicago Review of Books put it. It's more like a tentative step towards each other. The acknowledgement of the past, even if it's not dramatically rehashed, allows for a shift, a softening, a recognition of the other person's pain, their humanity. The power is in the quietness because it marks a breakthrough in a relationship that was defined by silence and avoidance for so long. It suggests that real reconciliation often isn't one big event, but maybe a fragile ongoing thing built on small, brave moments of vulnerability rather than grand gestures. It's about making space for what was unsaid to finally just exist between them, even if it's still heavy.
And critics mostly praised that subtlety, right? Exploring the stories we tell ourselves versus the truths we dodge. Book Browse called it spellbinding for its depth on family, forgiveness, facing the past. But it's interesting, some critiques, like The Guardian's, maybe noted the pacing could feel a bit static, that the characters seem frustratingly circular, maybe still kind of stuck even at the end. You mentioned earlier you thought that actually added realism. Can you expand on that? Does that make it frustrating for a reader or more real?
That's a really good point to dig into. And yes, I think it adds huge depth. While some readers might find static pacing or circular characters frustrating if they want a neat ending, I'd argue that's precisely where the novel feels most authentic. Real healing, especially from trauma that's deep-seated and long-held, is almost never a straight line, is it? It often involves setbacks, feeling stuck, repeating old patterns, even after a breakthrough. The characters don't just magically become new people. They've had a vital, if quiet, moment of connection. That emotional precision the critics liked is in that refusal to offer an easy fix. So for a reader, maybe it feels less like a perfect story arc and more like a really profound, empathetic reflection of real-life struggles. It reminds us that emotional growth is a journey, often a messy one, not just a destination. It shows Haslett's skill, I think, that even what some see as flaws can feel like a commitment to realism.
Okay, so we've really taken a deep dive into Adam Haslett's Mothers and Sons. We've seen this intricate dance of emotional distance, the silent weight of past trauma, and this really complex, subtle path towards understanding between a mother and son. We saw how both Peter and Anne use their work, their service, almost as a form of atonement, maybe, while also, perhaps unconsciously, avoiding their own deepest pain. It's a powerful look at how we sometimes seek external fixes for internal struggles.
And what's truly fascinating is that nuanced picture of reconciliation. It's not the big dramatic showdown leading to instant healing. It's much quieter, more personal. And that really challenges our maybe idealized ideas about how healing and forgiveness are supposed to happen. It reminds us that sometimes the biggest shifts happen in the quietest moments, not the loudest ones. It's more like a fragile new start than a final resolution.
And for you, our listener, this story really underscores the lasting impact of secrets and silence in families, but also how facing the past, maybe even indirectly, like Peter connecting with Basil's pain, can be that unexpected spark for change, the thing that cracks open the shell. So what does this leave us with? Maybe a final thought to chew on. If resolution in life is often quietly powerful, not necessarily this big cathartic bang, what does that teach us about how healing actually works in our own lives, our own relationships? Is the lack of that grand, dramatic ending sometimes the most profound way to move forward? A sign of the slow, quiet, maybe ongoing work of real reconciliation. We hope this deep dive has given you some powerful things to think about, maybe a fresh perspective on those complex, often unspoken family dynamics. Until next time, keep digging deeper.